He says the reason we're tearing each other apart is because we've forgotten the foundations that brought us together.
And those foundations, I contend, in the right side of history, lie 1, in Judeo-Christian ethics, and 2, in Greek teleology. We live in the most prosperous time in human history, a time when a baby born can expect to live past the year 80, a time when virtually no one is living in starvation conditions in the West, when virtually everybody can expect to have a long, healthy life, when racial tolerance is at an all-time high, when freedom is at an all-time high.
The reason why he can say this and nobody says anything against him is that the whole narrative has been cleansed. The whole narrative of our civilization has been cleansed of any Muslim identity.
Looks like a controlled demolition, and you have nothing to say? You have nothing to say about this?
I have seen the video. I can tell you that it is something we are raising with the governor of Israel, as we often do.
Raising as
when,
what?
When we see to ask questions and find out what the underlying situation is as governor of Israel.
It's not troubling to you?
We are always troubled by
I was always raised with how wrong the ethnic cleansing was of the Jews in World War II. This was our moral compass that was given to us as children.
But as I realized that Islam is cleansed out of the narrative, how easy is it to cleanse also the people out of the country? And I think that what's happening in Gaza is also enabled by this narrative that the Muslims didn't contribute anything.
We're now in the 4th month of what many are calling a genocide by Israel of the Palestinian people. We have some shocking new footage of the destruction in Gaza, which is emblematic of a wider problem in Western civilization itself. Why don't you show us this new footage?
So this is from Nicola Perugini. He's showing the Israeli military just blew up the University of Palestine in Gaza City with 315 mines. All the universities in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. We need a full academic boycott. And I just want to play this for us here just to see the sheer scale of the destruction.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're actually videoing this as if it's some kind of
photo op.
I mean, just look at this. This is a full-scale university and look at what they do to it. They absolutely pulverize it. There's nothing left of it. And this is a really good thread because this is Isra University. And it wasn't just the university that they did this to. The attack wasn't only on the campus, but it was also against the National Museum established by the university, containing more than 3,000 rare artifacts, which the Israeli occupation stole and then bombed the museum to cover up for the crime. Obviously, that's unverified, but it's something that's been put out there. And it's actually, as Nicola says, it's actually a systematic practice of detonation destruction of the Palestinian higher education system. So this was a medical school. This is the Faculty of Medicine at the Islamic University at the beginning of December. And then this is in actual fact the response by the United States.
And this is kind of unbelievable, actually, if we can watch part of it through.
Yeah, sure. Let's put this up.
Based on Saeed's question about the demolition of the university, I don't know if you've seen the video. Pretty widely available,
I have seen the video.
It looks like a controlled demolition. It looks like what we do here in this country when we're taking down an old hotel or a stadium, and you have nothing to say? You have nothing to say about this? To do that kind of an explosion, you need to be in there. You have to put the explosives down, and it takes a lot of planning and preparation to do. And if there was a threat from this particular facility, they wouldn't have been able to do it.
So I have seen the video. I can tell you that it is something we are raising with the governor of Israel, as we often do when we see
raising as
when,
what?
When we see to ask questions and find out what the underlying situation is, as we often do when we see reports of this nature. But I'm not able to characterize the actual facts on the ground before hearing that response.
Yeah, but you saw the video.
I did see the video. I don't know what was
a bridge being imploded.
I don't know what was under that building. I don't know what was inside.
But it doesn't matter what was under the building because they obviously got in there to put the explosives down to do it in the way that they did.
Again, I'm glad you have factual certainty about it. I just don't.
All I have is what I saw in the video.
I just
right?
don't.
And I think you guys saw it too.
Say, we did see it, and I can say that we have raised it with the government of Israel.
And it's not troubling to you?
We are always troubled by any degradation of civilian infrastructure in Gaza, but without knowing the actual underlying circumstances. I'm a little hesitant, I think for reasons that should be understandable, to pass definitive judgment on it from this podium.
Right, so at least he's troubled.
He's troubled.
Yeah,
and the funny thing that I always find, so this is another Euromed HR report that Israel has killed more than 94 professors and lecturers from various disciplines. These are known and confirmed victims, although the actual number may be higher due to communication and documentary challenges. There's a really good point that's made in a reply on the thread, which is that when you destroy a university or you kill so many professors, it means you're never going to be able to let that society regain its level of education to a similar level. And I find it extraordinary that Matthew Miller, on this particular thing, he's a State Department spokesman. He's like, yeah, we're gonna ask the people who are committing a genocide. Are you committing a genocide? I need your response. I've got this documentary evidence that you're actually blowing up civilian infrastructure, but did you have a really good reason to blow up civilian infrastructure?
And like the journalist said, it's about, he's put these mines down, and it's a clear photo op. So it's actually, to me, it seems like they're trying to break the spirit of the Palestinians. They're trying to, ethnically cleanse them, destroy their entire culture, society, civilization, and destroy their hope.
And destroy their capacity for future growth, for future educational attainment. And then when they don't have any educational attainment, they say, oh, look, you see these barbarians, they're completely uneducated, when the reality is they have a very high standard. You go to Palestine, every housewife is an MSc or a PhD. I'm not even joking. Right. And we have with us Dr. Abdul Haq Kompier. Welcome to the show.
Again, for the second time.
Yeah.
If viewers haven't seen his first appearance, it's an excellent story on actually how you converted to Islam and also the role of Islam in your in Dutch history. And for us, you're a true Renaissance man.
Yeah.
I may say so. You're actually quite a scholar in a second language in English. You've been published by Cambridge University Press on many of these scientific and historical issues.
You're a psychiatrist. You're a graphic designer.
Yeah.
You're a historian.
And you got grey hair. So it's all working out. So what's your take on this, on what we've just been seeing?
Okay, and salam alaikum, and thank you for having me again. And for the nice introduction. Yeah, so it is shocking footage, as you say, and it is showing what the West is permitting itself to do in the name of self-defense. To destroy a whole culture, to destroy a whole civilization, as is the definition of ethnic cleansing. It's not only to take away the people, but also to, as you say, to take away all their infrastructure and even their culture and their hope.
I think it's also to take away their capacity for future growth and for development. They want to degrade the people. And then once they're degraded, they want to blame them. Right? And this is, I think, actually the underlying motive behind all of this. It's to portray people as barbarians, substantiate the allegation they are, right? And then say, oh, look, well, this is why we have to remove them from our land.
And in that sense, it's actually a spectacular failure, because I think the whole world has seen the steadfastness of the Palestinians. Yeah. And it's actually remarkable, their equanimity in the face of true horror.
Yeah.
وليد قاعد هناك في اخر الدنيا زي الصخره بقى بكلمه يابا قضاء الله وقدره الحمد لله احنا في نعمه وانت زيه اوعى تنهز اوعى تنهار هذا قضاء الله احنا هيك الله كتب لنا هيك.
Many of them have been a model of steadfastness with the number of deaths that have gone around them. I think a lot of Western people are probably seeing videos of, fathers telling their children to be steadfast. These are difficulties from God. Your brother is with Allah.
Yeah, I saw that.
And these are things which only actually a religious background can actually give you. And I don't think there's any people on earth who believe like the Muslims believe in God and the afterlife. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, so it's good to compliment them, and but at the same time, as a psychiatrist, and you're studying the same field as well, we know that despite the steadfastness and their enormous faith in God, it will be a shock that's going to last for generations.
Yeah,
and may Allah help them and help them to recover. But to see this destruction as a child, it's very difficult to recover.
It's deeply scarring. Now, why have we shown this? We've shown this not just to document some of the barbarity that's going on, but actually because this particular image of the destruction of the university in this kind of photo op style is, as I said, emblematic.
As if they're proud.
Oh, absolutely.
It's as if they're proud of destroying somebody's university.
Yeah, and the Western handlers, the Western backers, in in America and the other Western countries,
Yeah.
haven't stepped back. They haven't even called for ceasefires, right? So they are supporting this. But this image to us was so profound because it seemed to signify and symbolize actually the West's approach to Islam, even intellectually, right? Basically, bomb it and don't leave a trace of it.
Yeah.
Okay. We've been seeing how they've been doing this in various Muslim countries physically, but actually, the reason why we've really brought you in is to talk about how they've been doing this for centuries intellectually.
Yeah.
Now, you have this wonderful article, The Islamic Origins of Renaissance Humanism, which hopefully by the time that we publish this is going to be live on our website, rationalreligion.co.uk. And it's an extremely scholarly article. We're not going to be able to go through everything. We really do ask the viewers to go and read it.
And we can put a link in the description box.
Yeah, link will be in the description below. This article argues for so many things that I think are deeply relevant for today, but which people have forgotten. Now, before we get there, because I want to set up a counterpoint to you, we're going to show you another great scholar of the modern day, Benjamin Shapiro. Why don't you introduce the clip that we're about to see?
So the clip we're about to see is kind of, we want to go to the clip first because your article is a wonderful expose of what he's about to say. And it's a great example of the mistake that Westerners make in particular with respect to Muslims, Arabs, and Islam. So let's just play it.
You say this book is really about two things. It's about two mysteries. The first is, why are things so good? And the second, why are we blowing it? Explain what you mean.
So we live in the most prosperous time in human history, a time when a baby born can expect to live past the year 80, a time when virtually no one is living in starvation conditions in the West, when virtually everybody can expect to have a long, healthy life, when racial tolerance is at an all-time high, when freedom is at an all-time high. So how did things get so good? How did we end up here? Because 2 centuries ago, everybody was dying in nasty, brutish, and short fashion. So what exactly changed is question number one. And number two is, why are we so angry at each other amidst the most glorious conditions ever lived in by any human beings at any time? And the answer is, we have to investigate the roots of our civilization.
He says the reason we're tearing each other apart is because we've forgotten the foundations that brought us together.
And those foundations, I contend, in the right side of history, lie 1, in Judeo-Christian ethics, and 2, lie in Greek teleology, the idea that we can apply reason to the universe and come up with good moral answers and scientific answers to the conditions that surround us. So that combination, the push and pull between human reason and divine revelation, that push and pull created the West. We have tried forcibly, in many cases, to undermine both of those bases for Western civilization. Then we're surprised when we return to the chaos that preceded them. Well, I mean, there are 2 perceptions of moral purpose that tend to merge in the West. Perception number 1 is that it is your job to serve God, that God put you on the planet not to serve your own ends, but to serve his ends. And this is in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the idea of revelation, that God gave you a moral purpose and that you have to live out that morality if you want to fulfill the purpose for which you were put on planet Earth.
I think the key point he's making is that, Judeo-Christian heritage brought with it a sense of purpose that was given by God and from the religious aspect, and that reason and the analysis of our place in the universe came from the Greeks. And this is what you talk about in your article at length, is how they kind of skip out about 600, 700, 800 years of history, and they jump from the Renaissance, and they jump all the way back over these pesky Arabs in the middle and the Muslims, and they fall upon the Greeks 2,000 years earlier. So can you introduce your article, what your thoughts are on what we've just said, and let's go from there.
Yeah, so it's definitely emblematic, as you say, of what we're talking about today, what Ben Shapiro is saying, that he is painting a picture of our Western civilization as being based on Judeo-Christian values and then Greek rationality, and completely leaves out Islam. Whereas Islam has made an enormous contribution exactly in these points as well of important values for our society, and as well as in rationality and in philosophy. But the reason why he can say this at this moment and nobody says anything against him is that the whole narrative has been cleansed. So the whole narrative of our civilization has been cleansed of anything of Muslim identity. And so there we can go to this narrative that everybody knows, that what is our civilization, right? So he'll probably talk about this in his book as well, that our civilization is suddenly emerged in around 500 years ago during the Renaissance, when the Christians or the Europeans, they found Greek manuscripts, and suddenly they were enlightened and started recreating this classical culture. And this is such a fairy tale, really, to say, although we are all being taught this in school. But this whole narrative of that enables this idea of everything going back to the Greeks, and to the Romans, is was created by quite consciously taking out the Muslim identity from the civilization that had been created from the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to right around the 13th, 14th century. The Muslim civilization made an enormous development and created all the values, established all the values that the West was built upon later on.
As part of the Renaissance, and as part of Renaissance humanism. So how would you? So we talk about Renaissance humanism, and they're two big words in and of themselves, and you've put them together in your article. Can you just summarize for us what humanism means today, and what it used to mean in the past, and what relevance it has to the Renaissance?
Yeah. So what humanism is thought of as today is that it is a philosophy or a life view that that distance itself from religion.
Yeah.
So many people who say that they're humanist would say this while saying that they are not religious. Right. But this was not actually what humanism was. Humanism was actually a cultural movement that that created the civilization of that led towards the Renaissance. So
it was the precedent in a way, or was the culture in which enabled scientific pursuit to occur.
Exactly.
In the West.
So actually, and it developed within the Muslim world.
I see.
And there it was called adab.
Adab.
And adab consisted of ideals and disciplines that would encourage education, learning, investigation, discovery, erudition.
So basically, the culture of scholarship, in a way, is adab.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I really hope people would understand is, as for this movement, is that it is the spirit of learning, the spirit of that has the ideal of perfecting yourself as a human being by learning, and by encouraging scholarship.
Yeah.
But what happened was that this movement came into being in the Muslim world,
in the Arab world specifically, I suppose.
Yeah, in the
Arab
world.
and the Persian world. Yeah.
Yeah. And this was adopted by Europeans through, for example, the conquest of Sicily. So Sicily had been ruled by Muslims for like 200 years, between 800 and 1000 approximately. Then around 1000, the Normans conquered Sicily, and they adopted the culture that was there.
Frederick II.
So this
Norman
was,
king.
for example, Frederick II, who was known among Christians as the wonder of the world.
Okay.
He was probably intelligent person, but it was also because he adopted all these things that were there from Muslim civilization.
And you highlight how his secretary was kind of the first European humanist.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah. So this culture of learning and education, this was very much a culture in the Arab world that would be around the courts, and who would be secretaries to the rulers, and so the Muslim rulers would have these secretaries that would know language very well, and that would be very educated and would be able to advise him and to express things in words well.
So where did the Arabs get this from? I mean, because you talk about adab as a kind of, you're emphasizing language here and the role of language. Did the Arabs just get this from the Greeks? Did they just get adab? And can somebody say that, look, this is all just Arabs receiving from the Greeks and giving it, passing on to the Europeans?
No. So it's good to have this story right. Actually, this movement came from Muslim values. So Muslims that are or values that are innate in the religion of Islam.
Okay.
So, for example, one of the values that is innate in the religion of Islam is the sanctity of the Arabic language, and to safeguard this pure language from being misrepresented, from being misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a very important motivation for the Muslims quite early on already, which is, by the way, a very amazing feature for the truth of Islam and for the authenticity of the Quran, that they were so specific about language and preservation.
Yeah.
Right? But even during the time of the Caliph Ali, radiallahu anhu, a contemporary of him, he developed a grammar for the Arabic language, which was, one of the things that happened very early on. Scholars would travel to Arab tribes for years to find the original meanings of words in the Quran, for example. And so already quite a big culture of scholarship was created quite early on, just by this motivation of protecting the holy text and the holy language.
Because there were non-Muslims coming into the religion, I guess.
Well, I guess so, but I think it's just for the sake of understanding the Quran and the deeper meanings, I assume.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, you said how it happened so early, and you've got this wonderful quote from the 9th century Spanish Christian Alvaro, and it highlights the contrast between the early Muslim development and European culture at that time. Spanish Christian Alvaro says, "My fellow Christians delight in the poems and romances of the Arabs. They study the works of Islamic theologians and philosophers, not in order to refute them, but to acquire a correct and elegant Arabic style. Where today can a layman be found who reads the Latin commentaries on the Holy Scriptures? Who is there that studies the Gospels, the prophets, and the apostles? Alas, the young Christians who are most conspicuous for their talents have no knowledge of any literature or language save the Arabic. They read and study with avidity Arabic books. They amass whole libraries of them at vast cost, and everywhere they sing the praises of Arabian law. On the other hand, at the mention of Christian books, they disdainfully protest that such works are unworthy of their notice. The pity of it! Christians have forgotten their own tongue, and scarce 1 in 1,000 can be found able to compose in fair Latin a letter to a friend. But when it comes to writing Arabic, how many there are who can express themselves in that language with the greatest elegance, and even compose verses which surpass in formal correctness those of the Arabs themselves." A very bold claim, if I may say. I mean, it's just remarkable, the pathos there of this Spanish Christian, and just showing how the European scholarship was actually just following Arabic scholarship.
So already from noticing this in the course of history, noticing how impressed and how intimidated people in Europe were by the Arabic linguistic culture. This is just already, without taking anything of this history that we're discussing into further account, this is so important that people were reacting to this in this way. And so we will see later that the Christians would search for a culture like this, so powerful, just for the linguistic aspect already, so powerful that they would search for a language that is as classical and as holy as Arabic.
Did they find one?
And for this, they find the classical Latin.
Okay.
So they weren't speaking, so 9th, 10th, 11th century, they weren't speaking Latin, or were they?
No, so we're talking now like 13th century, 14th century.
Okay.
And people were talking the vernacular Latin, and but the European humanists, so the European scholars who took over the values of the Arab humanism or the Arab adab, they decided that it had to be classical Latin, which was that language.
Okay.
Right. So they sorry, go on.
Yeah. But maybe we're moving a little bit quickly through history. I want to point out, I want to go back a little bit to
As you wish.
to the foundations of the Arabic or the Muslim movement of education, which is called adab, or which is called Islamic humanism. So you have this language aspect, and then you have the aspect of the appreciation of knowledge and the love for learning and the ideal of being educated, which is something that already came from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Because he said, "Keep learning, or seek knowledge. Even if you go to China, keep learning from the cradle to the grave," something like that. He used to say.
And for the one who seeks knowledge or sets out on a journey seeking knowledge, he is covered by Allah's mercy.
So all these things that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught, they also created an atmosphere where learning and education was encouraged. And this was really not a small thing. So these people who were becoming scholars, they would also learn to go to other cultures and to other civilizations to seek knowledge. So they would go to India and the Persian civilization. They would take good things out of. One example is the numerical system that came from India, and the Muslims adopted it.
Yeah.
So you get a culture of scholars who love education and who love to learn from different civilizations in the world.
Yeah.
And one important thing we have to stress is that in Islam, being educated is something that you do to fulfill your purpose towards God.
Right.
So it's sometimes today we think of education just as a preparation for production,
right,
or just as to learn a job or something.
Yeah.
But in Islam, this was like an ideal. It was something that you needed to do to fulfill your purpose as a human being and to perfect yourself as a human being.
Yeah.
So I think these two things I really want to stress as the energy and the power between this or behind this this cultural movement of adab or humanism, as we call it. So it is a very strong linguistic part with a very powerful linguistic culture, and it is an ideal of perfecting yourself as a human being through education.
He mentioned this in two parts. The usul, in your article, you mentioned there's two aspects, the usul al-Arabiya and the usul al-Insaniya. So the usul, the learning of the language, and the learning of insaniya, humanity, which became humanities, humanism, etc. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, I was actually surprised in the article about this discussion of individuality, because I think one of the great criticisms of the West, that's too individualistic, and I think that's very correct. But there's also criticism of different, say, Eastern philosophies, that they're too collectivistic.
Yeah.
And that can also hold them back.
Yeah.
And you've highlighted that Islam, and this is a quote from your article, Islam has a special combination in its values of unity of the Muslim Ummah on the one hand, so the Muslim community globally, and on the other hand, recognition of the individual human being in his personal relationship to God, even as a reflection of him. This relationship was not, as in Catholicism, mediated by priesthood. And you went on to talk about how the focus on the individual and the perfection of the individual, and how the individual can have some honor in doing something first or doing something best, actually was something which was an Islamic culture and was actually adopted by the West. Is that correct?
You mentioned the terms Farid Dahri, for example, if you could just mention them as well, and how they got translated into the Latin.
You've said, as Muslim culture grew, individualists, I'm literally taking the words out of your mouth, I apologize. As Muslim culture grew, this is page 7, as Muslim culture grew, individualistic ideals became more clearly established, such as Farid Dahri or Nasij Wahdi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing those correct, which were adopted by Latin humanists as uomo singulare and uomo unico. So the ideal of... Okay, so then you go on to talk about this. Have I summarized that correctly about the adoption of individuality and its virtues there?
Yeah, so this is extremely important because when you want to have a civilization based on discovery and of innovation and of initiative, then being an individual that that has a focus and has a right to develop itself and to establish himself.
Yeah.
This is really important, as we see in our own civilization now.
Yeah.
But which was also a very important feature of the Muslim civilization that was the basis of the European Renaissance.
Yeah.
And these ideas are very beautiful, as you say, and as the European scholars took over these ideas, they translated it into Latin.
Yeah.
And one that I like is al-alim al-amal in Arabic, which means the scholar who acts on his words.
Yeah.
So integrity, having integrity.
Yeah,
in a way,
not being a hypocrite.
Not being a hypocrite.
It's integrity, but also I think the idea of knowledge in Islam is not only to have theoretical knowledge, but to also have practical knowledge.
Yeah.
So maybe it's about that as well. And this is translated into Latin as loquandi faciendi humanista, which is much less stylish, which would really bother the scholar, the Spanish scholar that you were quoted before.
Yeah,
who was
upset about the degree of
But what was he upset about?
Well, he was upset about the fact that the Europeans were not learning Arabic and they were learning.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah,
they were looking at learning Arabic. They weren't learning Latin and studying the Gospels and the prophets and the apostles.
Yeah.
So this is amazing. So basically, if I can just summarize what we said up till now, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So from the Quran and the culture of learning that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, brought, and the extraordinary linguistic power of the Quran and the desire to formalize that, you got the first Arabic grammar system, which came out of the companion of the fourth caliph of Islam. And that developed the science of lexicology and the science of language. And out of that came a culture of scholarship, which then permeated the rest of Arabic civilization. And develop these terms, for example, al-alim al-amil, and other things to do with perfection of the individual to a high level.
And it's not actually, it's not something which is a coincidence, like you've been pointing out, that it came from Islam. I mean, like you said, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, exhorted people to seek knowledge. Arabic is inherent in the study of the Quran, but also the Quran itself in its teachings multiple times tells people to reflect on nature, to understand things, to even observe nature as a command in the Holy Quran. So the Quran itself actually is what is exhorting people to develop knowledge and to live by that knowledge and to develop scholarship. And what you're saying is that this was then, the West were exposed to this and it became part of them.
Well, it sounds like they became envious of it and then they resurrected a dead language to try and battle Arabic. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so what we're seeing now is like between 9th century and 13th century in the Muslim world is a huge civilization developed with enormous scholarship, where we have thousands of scholars traveling from one side of the Muslim world to the other side for decades, and to keep learning and to then transmit this knowledge again to other people. And they had this, they had a linguistic style, and they had they had scientific discovery and all that. So this was extremely impressive. And the Europeans were impressed, as you showed by this quote of the Spanish scholar Alvaro from the 9th century already. So this was quite early. So
yeah, that's really early.
Yeah. So you see some envy and some sense of inferiority among the Christians, because in Europe these were the Dark Ages. Right. So they were not able to read and write. The people in Europe, and they didn't have all this civilization as the Muslim world had. So definitely they were impressed and envious, and they wanted to have the same thing. And they did adopt a lot of Arabic works in big translation projects, like in Spain.
Yeah.
They translated so many books. And so the Muslim authors were extremely important, like between the 11th century and the 14th century. The Europeans did appreciate the Arab authors as well. But when this culture of scholarship became a bit stronger in Europe, they started to desire to distance itself from the Muslim example.
Wow.
Somehow. So
can you tell us more about that? How did that happen?
Yeah. So this was, as we said, that it had to do with envy, but also, of course, with the theological impossibility that you would be appreciating the culture of which was founded by what you believe is a false prophet.
Oh, I see.
Right.
And which is
it's like civilizational embarrassment.
Something like that. And so we have a few quotes by other scholars. So not to quote myself, like we have an important scholar of Orientalism, William Montgomery Watt, who says that Europeans were attracted to Aristotle not simply by the inherent qualities of his philosophy, but also by the fact that he belonged in a sense to their own European tradition. That is to say, the assignment to Aristotle of a central position in philosophy and science is partly understood as one aspect of the European assertion of distinction from Islam.
So they're defining themselves by what they're not. And they're developing this is what I found interesting in your article. You talked about them generating, as they developed their own scholarship and their desire to break away from the Islamic model that they had copied effectively, they then desired to create a distance, and to do that they created a kind of European identity as distinct from the Arab identity. So they couldn't do it easily on religion, because I guess the Islamic civilization had Christians, it had Jews, it had Muslims, right? The Arab Muslim civilization, but they decided to then do it on the basis of race. So I think that's something that came through quite interestingly. And you talked about Dante, for example. I found that really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about Dante's Inferno and how it kind of copied Islam but rejected it simultaneously?
Yeah, exactly. So Dante lives in Sicily, in which the Normans had just taken over the rule.
Right.
And he was a literary genius, but he also was influenced by the Muslim examples that he had around him. And he... in his most famous book, the Inferno, the Divina Commedia, it's called. There he makes a journey through heaven and hell. But these were actually proven to be inspired by Sufi accounts of the ascension to heaven of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, where he was also shown heaven and hell.
Right.
And so Dante used these stories of the Muslim mystics as an example for his book,
as a template.
But at the same time he put the Holy Prophet Muhammad in the deepest corner of hell.
So he's inspired by somebody, but then he goes and says, also he's false. It's almost like removing the traces of the original idea, because you don't want people to realize you've copied something.
But even then, if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't he also put Ibn Rushd, Averroes in heaven, who is a Muslim scholar? Because because he was so influential in the West and in Europe, that they found it very difficult to break away from him, because they learned a lot about Aristotle from Ibn Rushd.
I see.
Yeah.
So it was always a give and take.
I find that really interesting. And you also talked about how medicine was at the forefront of this battle between establishing a European identity distinct from Islam. And there was this amazing quote that you had, which was so powerful, which I'd be really grateful if you could go through.
Yeah, so this idea that everything in Western civilization comes from classical Rome and Greece.
Right.
So we just had this quote from William Montgomery Watt about Aristotle. But when we think about it, that in the Middle Ages, what relationship did the Europeans have with classical Rome and Greece? So there was actually no relationship because the Romans were not Christian. The Greeks were also not Christian. Often their philosophy was deemed heretical. And the Christian culture of the Middle Ages was not interested in scholarship. So maybe I'm not doing justice to Christianity fully, to all the Christian movements that have existed. But I think that Christianity, as in general, has not been interested in education and learning as much, because you just had to believe in Christ to have salvation.
Yeah.
You just had to go through this phase on earth by holding on to your faith and attain salvation. So this may be a stereotype, but I think it's good to make this comment about Christianity. And otherwise, we have not many other explanations for the fact that the Dark Ages were so dark.
Yeah.
And so Christian.
If Christianity...
Yeah, so dark and so Christian simultaneously.
Yeah.
So if Christians in Europe really were motivated to study and develop themselves, then this wouldn't happen.
And actually, as religion broke down in the society, they opened up to learning.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe not quite.
Not exactly
This
the
is
same
maybe
time.
in the last few centuries is the case. But the humanists, the European humanists, they were quite energetic about their Christianity. But they also wanted to have this culture of learning as well.
Yeah.
But I just want to look at the role of the classics, of classical Rome and Greece in our civilization. How logical is it? It isn't very logical because there was no relationship in the Dark Ages. And it was only when the Christians saw that the Muslims included the classical Greek authors in their humanist culture, and they did such great things with it, with these authors, that the Christians thought, hey, this looks great. And, I've been imagining how the Christians would have felt that there was a connection, and maybe it was just geographical, that Italy used to be the Roman Empire, or that like the Gospels had been written in Greek at one time. So maybe these were reasons that the Christians started thinking like these are ours.
These are ours, and we haven't done anything with it.
So they don't belong to these Muslims. The Muslims are doing great things with them.
Yeah.
But actually they are ours.
Yeah.
And so this is a really important move in the narrative of our civilization, where they made this decision. And in this dynamic, they also made the decision to choose classical Latin as a competitor for the classical Arabic.
Yeah.
And of Aristotle as central in philosophy. Whereas probably the Muslim authors were much more developed than Aristotle.
Yeah.
But still the Europeans, they made this decision that no, it has to be Aristotle and it has to be the Greeks.
And even Ibn Rushd, who was celebrated so much in the European world because he was such a purist of Aristotelianism, whereas in the Muslim world, he didn't actually have that much of an impact at all.
Oh, really?
No, he didn't have much of an impact, especially compared to what he had in the West. And also, I want to, just comment on the fact that, I think what you said is obviously very true, because the previous... you said maybe it's an overgeneralization, but I think it's a very fair one, because when you look at kind of Christian scholarship pre their exposure to Islam, it's very minimal. Yeah. It's very minimal. Yeah, it's there. There are some efforts, but it's not very fast, and it's not very
Systematic.
concerted. Yeah, systematic. And also, I think it's because they also have a very isolated priesthood. The idea of seeking knowledge wasn't something which was more generalized. They have an isolated priesthood. They are the scholars. Everyone comes and confesses their sins to them. And how much do you really need to know? You really, like you said, you just need to know that the Bible is true and to believe. Whereas the Quranic script and Islam tells you have to find things out. You have to learn.
Yeah.
And if you understand nature better and you understand the nature of the heavens and the earth and man himself, then you'll understand better the nature of the Creator. So there's this natural impetus within Islam and within the Quran, which is not there within Christianity. And the historical evidence of this is exactly what you've pointed out, which is the Christians only seek this after they have centuries of contact with the Muslims. And I'll just point you to the last part of that quote from William Montgomery Watt, where it says the purely negative activity of turning from Islam, especially when so much was being learned from Arab science and philosophy, would have been difficult, if not impossible, without a positive complement. The positive complement was the appeal to Europe's classical Greek and Roman past. And I remember Ben Shapiro, I think we didn't show this part of it. He later, it's in a different video where he says, yeah, the Muslims were good. They translated the books in their golden age, they translated the books of the Greeks, as if they didn't do anything past that. And as if they were just carrying water for the white man to pick it up again.
I mean, so this is extremely unfair. This is really extremely unfair. And so because it was the whole motivation to educate yourself and the whole motivation to have a linguistic culture which came from Islam. So it's completely unfair to say that the Muslims translated some books and they handed them to the enlightened people of the West.
And what I find extraordinary about that is because they highlight Greek and Roman, but the reality is, as you yourself have just pointed out, they took from the Indians, they took from the Greek and Romans, they took from the Persian, very rich Persian culture, huge Persian civilization that ended with the Muslims taking over. They took from the Egyptians, right? So the Muslims didn't just take from the Greeks and the Romans. And they didn't just take, they developed, and there's very good evidence, you know about it well in terms of the development of the
Shukuk movement.
Yeah, the Shukuk movement. But also, there's also very good evidence on the side of astronomy in particular, that the Muslims surpassed the earlier scholars within 50 to 100 years. Actually, by the middle of the 9th century, they were already past them, and they had already developed a systematic way or they had already developed a way of critiquing past scholarship. Actually, sorry,
and I'm going to read something that will show people how obvious it was that they surpassed them. Because look at this culture that developed. Look at this culture that developed in a few hundred years after the coming of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Just look at this example. This is one of the many scholars mentioned in the book of George Makdisi that I'm referring to in my article. His name is Al-Khali. He was born in the region of Diyarbakir in Anatolia in 893. He went to study adab, so humanism, in Iraq, at first in Mosul in 915 and 2 years later in Baghdad. He studied under the great scholars of his day. Over 2 decades later, when he had finished his studies, he left Baghdad for Cordova. So he traveled all the way from Iraq to Spain.
Wow.
Arriving in 942, and there he settled until his death in 967. And it was in Cordova that he summarized all the knowledge that he had collected in his life. So he wrote this book called The Dictations. And in the introduction of this book, he says that seeing that knowledge is the most precious merchandise, I knew for certain that setting out in search of it would be the best kind of commerce. I therefore left my homeland to hear knowledge transmitted, and I clung to the scholars in order to understand it. Then I busied myself in collecting it and worked my intelligence in memorizing it until I had gathered the most significant part of it, preserving its refinements, transmitting its splendors, knowing its subtleties, understanding its anomalies, passing on its rarities, perceiving its obscurities, and learning its lucidities. I then dictated this book from memory on Thursdays in Cordova, in the mosque of the blessed shining city Az-Zahra.
So on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I was doing other scholarship activities. On Thursday, I was like dictating from memory everything I've ever learned.
Yeah. but there's so much in this quote, right?
Yeah.
Because you also see how much he loves knowledge and how much he has been working with it. That he talks in so many ways about knowledge. That it's splendors, it's refinements, it's subtleties, it's anomalies. So this is somebody who really was working with knowledge all his life.
Yeah, and cherished it.
Yeah, and this is just one example. So there were, I think, thousands of people that lived like this.
Yeah.
And now Israel is busy bombing all of these books, these ancient manuscripts to bits, basically.
Right.
And it's... Sorry, go on.
No, please.
I was going to transition into another point. So did you want to complete this point?
Yeah, I think it's important to that I really wanted to read this because it's such a beautiful example. But what we were going to look at was that why the Europeans had to draw these classical authors into it, the Greeks and the Romans, and why did everything have to become Greek and Rome? Like now, today, even if we're going to some kind of conference about any subject, we always have this people saying that Socrates already said this, Aristotle already said this. It always has to be some kind of reference to the classics. So this is the narrative that was created. And this narrative could only be created by ethnically cleansing the Muslims out of the story.
Yeah.
And this is the painful part of it. And this is why Ben Shapiro can say something like this, that Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian values and Greek rationality. Because in the whole narrative, the whole Muslim contribution, which was essential, has been cleansed out.
Yeah.
I wanted to read something from a doctor who was busy with this campaign. So this campaign of cleansing the academic world from Arabian influences.
Yeah.
The biggest push in the ethnic cleansing of our narrative of our civilization is in the early 16th century. And here is a quote from a doctor called Fuchs, who wrote a book in 1555 called The Institutions of Medicine. And he says, "It is best to reject the Arabs completely and just to abandon them, the barbarians of a bygone age. And as if one drinks water from the purest spring, to start studying the writings of the Greek physicians, who have passed on the art of medicine in its most pure and incontaminated form, and by the most reliable of methods, all that is required for the medical practice. As everything in the teachings of the Arabs is dirty, barbaric, contaminated, complicated, and littered with the worst errors, likewise all that is Greek is clean, clear, brilliant, lucid, transparent, and uncontaminated. The Arabs have nothing which they did not borrow from the Greeks, except for the mistakes which only they make." So it is very difficult to create a more racist slur. Or
I think Netanyahu is doing his best, actually.
Well, I mean, but Ben Shapiro said something not too dissimilar.
No, he didn't. I mean, let me bring it up, actually. He said something very similar. He said, Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. This is not a difficult issue. And that was in relation to settlements.
So did he say this when he was like 14?
No, he said this in 2010. So, I mean, I think he's in his 40s now, probably. So maybe in the 30s, perhaps.
Yeah, so he's an adult. And it's emblematic again of how this attitude has continued. But what strikes me is actually that the West does not try as they have not been able to completely expunge, obviously, their culture, even of the appearance of Arab things. So, for instance, even the idea of a university was something which famously Fatima al-Fihri in the 9th century founded the first sort of school of learning in that university sense. And it is said, it's difficult to verify this, but it makes sense, and it has been said that when we graduate, we get into gowns and we have the hats, and it looks very much like Arab dress,
Yes.
with the thobs and all this.
Yeah.
So even then, at the peak of every individual scholarship, you celebrate Arab culture.
Completely true. Completely true. And we should celebrate that this is still happening, definitely. So that's a beautiful example, and it is an example of how we have lost also part of our own culture by misunderstanding this, because we don't really understand why they're wearing that, right?
Yeah.
We don't understand why this hat is like this. So that's what I would like to argue in understanding this and understanding the complete narrative of our civilization.
Yeah.
That if we leave out Islam and if we ethnically cleanse Islam from the picture, and then we don't also understand part of our own civilization.
Right.
And you cannot say, like Ben Shapiro says, that it is based on Judeo-Christian and Greek rationality, because it's just not true.
Right. So you're saying actually the picture of the West itself is deficient, that the West cannot understand itself without accepting that Islam is part of the West, and has been part of the Western story. I mean, we're all Western in a sense here.
Yeah,
you're ethnically Western. How does that kind of affect you, and how did that affect you and your story, kind of growing up and learning these things?
Yeah. So as I was so much impressed with Islam and became Muslim, then of course, as a European, I wanted to know the relationships that were there, and so I started looking for these things and came across things like this. One interesting example that what we're talking about now, I came across maybe 20 years ago,
right? And
I have the books that I came across here in front of me on the table, but I found them only in the university library at the time.
Yeah.
But at the moment, you can only buy them in antique bookshops.
Really?
Because, you just cannot buy them.
And these are the books on the table here in front of us.
So we have, which books
we
are
have
they?
here books by Joel Kramer, published by Brill, publisher in Leiden in Holland, with the title Humanism in the Renaissance of Islam. And the other one is an amazing book by George Makdisi, which is called The Rise of Humanism in Classical Islam and the Christian West. And these are just amazing academic works, but almost impossible to find.
Yes.
Right. And so, but for about your question about how it is for me, I think it is painful to realize for me that aspect of cleansing Islam out of the narrative, but it also makes me afraid because I was always raised as a Dutch person with how wrong the ethnic cleansing was of the Jews in the World War II. This was our moral compass that was given to us as children by our parents. But as I realized that that Islam is cleansed out of the narrative, how easy is it to cleanse also the people out of the country? And I think that what's happening in Gaza is also enabled by this narrative that we're talking about.
Yeah,
that the Muslims didn't contribute to anything.
Yeah,
and you can bomb them to bits because it doesn't matter. They never contributed a thing, and we are superior and we are Judeo-Christian and all that, and they are just barbarians. So it makes me afraid to see this happening with the narrative of our culture. It also makes me sad to see that Muslims have to live with being regarded as sort of secondary citizens and people who kind of come to consume a civilization instead of having been contributing to it.
Right.
So if all the Muslims would
like they're parasites and just taking, and they never gave anything.
Exactly. So if all the young Muslims who are trying to integrate and trying to move forward in our society, if they would think of themselves as being part of a culture that contributed to the civilization, it would be much different feeling for them than it is now, that they have to assimilate into something.
There's a really nice part. I mean, there are sections of our society which are starting to realize that this is wrong and this isn't the right approach, and that actually Muslims have contributed a great deal. And one particular book which is very famous in the medical world, especially in the United Kingdom, I don't know how it is, you're a doctor in Holland, I don't know if it's there, it's called The Cheese and Onion. It's called the Oxford Handbook of Clinical Medicine. And if you open the interior cover of it, or at least on previous editions, I don't know if you noticed this, it has two pictures. It has two trees, one on one side and one on the other. And on one tree, there are the apples, and the apples are named Vesalius, Hippocrates, Galen, and it's got all the European fruits. And then on the other side, you've got another tree, and it's got Ibn Sina. It's got all of the Islamic scientists and Islamic Arab personalities.
I don't remember that, at least.
So yeah, it's in there, and it was in the very opening cover of the most prestigious English medical textbook that has ever existed, the Oxford Handbook of Clinical Medicine. We call it The Cheese and Onion because its cover is yellow and green.
Oh, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, so I mean that I really liked, and it's a shame it's actually been removed from subsequent editions.
Has it?
Yeah, on the latest edition, I think it has been removed. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it has. But when I was studying medicine at university, it was there, and I really liked that, and I noticed it, and I valued it.
Very nice. And so there are even connections between the two trees, as we are discussing now. Something I have to think of is that it is true that sometimes people are impressed and open to the story of the contribution of Islam, and it is also a very exciting story. And I wrote about it as well when I was studying medicine in Holland. I wrote an article about the influence of the Arab doctor Zakaria Razi, who was called Razes in Europe, on a doctor from Belgium centuries later. And so this story is that this doctor in Belgium is very much at first in this ethnic cleansing attitude. So he studies in Paris, and he says that all the Arab words has to go out of the books. And then he moves to Switzerland, and then he becomes a little bit more open. And then he moves to Italy, and then he prefers the Arab authors over the Greek ones that were celebrated so much in Paris. So I wrote about this role of this Arab doctor in his life. And this was even published by Cambridge University Press.
Right.
So that's definitely a sign that people are sometimes open to it. And it is an exciting story.
Maybe Western scholarship is in its Switzerland phase. It's going to move forward.
I want to cover one particular last bit, if that's all right with you, is a humanism aspect. So you talk also in the article about how humanism has lost its soul because Al-Insaniya, Usul al-Insaniya, was one of the branches of adab, of Islamic, how can we translate that, learning scholarship, was the study of the humanities, of things that were relevant to humans. And that included logic, it included the sciences, but it also included moral philosophy. And how it's now taken on a meaning of basically a secular religion. If you're a humanist, you've got the humanistic outlook or religion without God. So it's trying to create a religion without God.
It's just atheism, right?
It's basically, it's just attempting to replace the moral aspect of religious tradition with an atheistic-based framework of ethics.
And a lot of our early material was on critiquing humanism.
We went full on against humanism.
And the videos.
we went full on against humanism. I don't know if you know or not.
No, so I was figuring that it might be difficult if I talk about humanism in a.
It was a struggle.
Way.
It was actually. I was like, humanism? What? Encompassing a belief in the divine? I was like, I didn't get it, but I got it by the end. But can you tell us a little bit about how humanism changed in the West itself between the early 20th century and now?
Yeah.
or early 19th. Even.
And you were completely right in critiquing humanism, of course, because it is a humanism that is, as it is defined now, as being a kind of a secular view on humanity. So the humanism, as it is defined now, is a result of struggles of the Western world with its socio-political problems, and especially with Christianity. For example, there was a movement in the 19th century called the Ethical Movement, who tried to find an alternative for Christianity because of its shortcomings. And so they were actually thinking about, at that time they were still saying that religions have had positive contributions to humanity, but Christianity is not working for us anymore. So what should we do? And it is extremely painful that they couldn't just look to Islam. And this probably has to do with the whole narrative that had been created for centuries, where Islam has no role. But anyway, so the Europeans from the 19th and 20th century, they had this big struggle with Christianity, and were then shocked by 2 world wars, and had to react to that with trying to get to keep their mind together. And this was just these humanist manifestos which were written.
Yeah.
They used the term humanism.
Okay.
But I think it is completely out of context, because they present themselves as being the legitimate heir to the humanist tradition. But in fact, it is just they're just socio-political movements,
right?
And they are not scholarly movements, for example. So that's one thing. But they're socio-political movements who call themselves humanists, and who then use this name to serve atheism.
Yeah.
Because Christianity didn't work for them anymore. But the true humanism was extremely religious. And as we have said, the values of humanism being purity in language, scholarship in language, it came from values having to do with the Quran. And the ideal of education as someone that helps you attain the purpose of your creation by God, and helps you in your relationship to God. These are values from Islam.
Yeah.
And so it's extremely important to remember this, that the humanist tradition in the Islamic world, but also in the European humanists of the 14th to 16th centuries, maybe up until the 19th centuries, they were religious.
Yeah.
So they were studying the Bible. They were really trying to seek knowledge in every field, and were very, very religious. So it is very unfair that the humanists movements of today claim this name for atheism, whereas the tradition for many centuries has been a very religious one.
So ironically, in an attempt to create a non-religious, non-divine basis for a religion, or an atheistic religion, they've had to hearken back to a name which was created by a religion, effectively, and a set of values which emanated from the holy text of the Quran. And what I particularly love, and I really just kind of emphasize and bring it back, is the fact that, in a way, it was actually a consequence, obviously, of what the Islamic teachings were about reason, about study of nature, etc. But from my reading of your article, it was more than that. It was actually also a function of the spread of Islam so rapidly. So we know that 2 things happened early in the history of Islam, is that when Islam spread very rapidly and large numbers of non-Arabs came into Islam, we have the companion Hudayfa, may Allah be pleased with him, he went to the Caliph Uthman and may Allah be pleased with them, and said there are lots of non-Arabs, Persians, people in Europe, people in Egypt, people in other countries who speak, sometimes they speak very difficult dialects of Arabic, or they don't understand the standard Qurayshi Arabic, but they are accepting Islam and they are memorizing these passages and they are replacing their common words in their dialects into the text. Right? And so Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, became worried about this, and then he created the standardized Islamic Arabic Qurayshi text, which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, peace be on him, gave to the world. And that became the standardized Islamic text throughout the world. And what you're kind of saying is that in the Caliph Ali's time, the next Caliph, what happened was they actually developed a system of grammar from the Quran because to a certain extent, I imagine, possibly also it was a continuation of that. You had so many non-Arabs entering Islam, they also had to learn the language, right? So as to preserve it. Because almost immediately, Arabs were the minority in all of the major nations that they had conquered, right? So you look at the number of Arabs in Egypt, it didn't break 10%. The number of Muslims in Egypt, it didn't break 10% for several hundred years, right?
Same in Spain.
So, this also goes along against the narrative that Islam was a religion of conquest, because it took hundreds of years, for example, for Egypt to become a Muslim majority nation. But from what my reading of your excellent scholarly Adabi article, it's that this was also a function of the spread of Islam and the desire to understand the Quran in its original language, which shows just another facet that we've come across of the enormous blessing of the Quran upon humanity.
Yes, it is. And the Arabic language as well. And it's nice to point out that Osman made a very humanistic effort to safeguard the Quran against other influences, that he wanted to keep it pure.
Yes.
But in a way we can, I think it's maybe more accurate to say it was a more Muslim effort, if you will, because actually the good aspects of humanism was just practicing Islam, and is the outflow of Islam itself. And when humanism is almost like a mirror in a civilization which is based upon divine precepts, which is based upon real rationality, that there is real objective truth, and that we should study nature and understand things more deeply. What we call humanism or scholarship, flourishes in that way. When you get to a highly atheistic society, then your humanism or your scholarship only reflects the subjective nature of truth as they see it, where things are, might is right, and where things are true if enough people believe it, which is what many Western people, including Ben Shapiro, actually, and Jordan Peterson, who, famously at the outbreak of this war said, "Give them hell." To the Israelis about the Palestinians, this is what they keep harping on about, which is that we need to get back to the Judeo-Christian roots of our civilization. But what you've put forward, not just in this video actually, but also in your previous video where you talked about the political,
which we can link as well,
and the free speech aspects, actually so many of these good aspects were found in Islam and were taken from Islam. So to call it Judeo-Christian becomes a little bit misleading, especially, and this is maybe the subject of a different video. A lot of the progress in science was made in breaking from Christianity and breaking from the Bible and many of the irrational dogmas there, which you talk about in this article as well. So they're looking for their religious roots, but actually the religion in which they were rooted was Islam.
Yeah. And on that,
absolutely
pretty awkward.
And and I wanted to make one more point.
Yes.
That the humanist movement at this moment is also struggling to have any bearing on society, right?
Yes. True.
Because they have not a coherent system of thought. They have no moral bearing on what is happening in the world, really. And so I think that the humanist community is also looking very much for its soul. And so what I want to propose is that actually the soul that they were looking for in the 19th century, when they said we need another religion, that was the moment actually when the promised Messiah alayhi salam came, the Messiah of Islam.
Founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be on him.
Exactly, and he brought again to life the values of Islam that had once also pushed the European civilization forward, and so the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, made these values alive again, and he came also exactly at the right moment when they were looking for this new religion.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, because of this false narrative of Islam being just something that never contributed anything and is just barbaric, maybe they couldn't see it. But it was the soul that the humanist movement actually was looking for and should now look at to find new life in its values. Because the jaws of neoliberalism will otherwise chew them all these values to bits. Because what is left if humanity is just a biological creature in the whole chain of survival of the fittest? Education is then just something political or just something of having to do with production. But if you say that education is something that will attain your purpose in life that God has given you, then this is a much more powerful motivation.
Absolutely.
To keep celebrating these values of education and of learning and scholarship and of moral philosophy.
Well, what we get is the world we have today, which is where we're seeing these kind of harrowing images of the so-called enlightened civilizations blowing, others to bits, those who are implicitly considered as barbarians. And that's the morality that comes out of all this, very, very sadly. What we're seeing here is that a true return to God, both intellectually and spiritually, would actually allow us all to live in peace. So may God enable us to have that. I'll just mention at the end here that, a lot of what you've been saying, what we've all been discussing, at the foundation for many of us intellectually was the fourth caliph's work in Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge and Truth, where he traces the origins of the Renaissance back to its exposure to Islam. And the fifth caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community a few years ago in his famous Ahmadiyya Muslim Research Association conference, stood before so many of the distinguished scientists of our community and said, you need to now make up for the deficiencies of the West in its research and in its searching for truth and go forward and become researchers. So that's something which Ahmadiyya Muslims try and do, and you've done it wonderfully. So we thank you for your contributions here, and we hope people will read this article and benefit from it. And to those at home, we always thank you for your views, and God willing that, there'll be a ceasefire in Palestine and that we'll have peace there and a lasting peace.
Justice.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.